You have 24 hours to get rid of those vicious animals, or I will have them put down myself. Those were the words that echoed in my head, a declaration of war delivered from the perfectly manicured front lawn of my own home. The woman who spoke them, Brenda, the self-appointed queen of our homeowners association, stood there with her arms crossed, her face a mask of smug certainty. She looked like a cheap garden gnome someone had painted with too much self-satisfaction. I'm Frank. Just Frank. I'm a structural engineer by trade, semi-retired, though my hands always need something to do. For the last 2 years, since my wife, Sarah, passed, that something has been woodworking. Building things, solid things with clean lines and undeniable purpose, felt like the only way to shore up the foundation of my own life, which had cracked right down the middle. My companions in this quiet, solitary life were judge and jury. They were Sarah's partners before they were my friends. 2 magnificent German shepherds, retired from the K-9 unit where Sarah had been a handler. They weren't just pets, they were living, breathing extensions of her legacy. They were calm, disciplined, and more intelligent than most of the people I met. They were also the reason Brenda was standing on my lawn, spitting threats like a broken sprinkler head. This whole mess had started, as most neighborhood wars do, over something impossibly small. It began with their barking. Or rather, the lack of it. Judge and jury were trained professionals. They didn't bark at squirrels or mail carriers. They barked precisely twice when someone approached the door, a deep, authoritative woof that was less a nuisance and more a security announcement. Brenda, however, heard something else. In her world, a world of beige siding and uniform lawn heights, 2 large German shepherds were an unacceptable deviation from the norm. They were, in her words from the first violation notice, an intimidating presence. The notice, a crisp piece of cream-colored cardstock, had been left tucked under my windshield wiper. It cited a violation of Bylaw 17, Section C, nuisance animals. It demanded immediate rectification. I read it, chuckled at the corporate speak, and filed it away. I assumed it was a bureaucratic mistake. A week later, a second notice arrived, this time with a $50 fine. The offense was now excessive and aggressive barking. I knew for a fact the dogs hadn't barked more than their usual 4 times a day, twice for the mail, twice for a package delivery. I decided it was time for some neighborly clarification. I found Brenda directing a landscaping crew, pointing at a rosebush with the imperious authority of a Roman general condemning a gladiator. She was a woman in her late 50s, with a helmet of blonde hair that looked like it could withstand a direct impact. Brenda, I said, holding up the notice. I think there's been a misunderstanding. She turned, her eyes scanning me from head to toe as if checking for compliance with the community dress code. There's no misunderstanding, Frank. Your animals are a menace. I tried the calm, logical approach. It's the engineer in me. Define the problem, present the data, find the solution. They're retired police dogs, I explained patiently. They're highly trained. The aggressive barking you cited was 2 barks when the UPS driver came yesterday. It's an alert, not a nuisance. She waved a dismissive hand, the charm bracelet on her wrist jangling officiously. I don't care what they were. I care what they are. And they are large, loud, and frankly, they don't belong here. This is a community for families, not for guard dogs. The condescension was a physical thing, a film in the air between us. I took a breath. I'll be happy to provide you with their service records, their training certifications, even a letter from Sarah's former captain at the department. They're model citizens. Paperwork doesn't change the fact that they are frightening, she sniffed. Pay the fine, Frank. And keep them quiet. She turned back to her rosebush, the conversation declared over. That was the beginning. It was a small crack in the pavement, but I knew from my profession that small cracks, left untended, can bring down entire structures. The fines kept coming. The reasons became more and more absurd. Improperly secured animals when they were in my fenced backyard. Intimidating posture when jury was sleeping on my front porch. I paid the first fine, a gesture of goodwill. The second, I contested in a polite, formally written letter, citing the bylaws back at her and pointing out the lack of any actual evidence. Her response was to double the next fine and add a new violation, failure to comply with HOA directives. She was building a case, brick by worthless brick, and I was the foundation she planned to build it on. The harassment escalated from paper to person. When I walked the dogs, always leashed, always on the sidewalk, Brenda would appear, phone in hand, recording us. She'd make comments just loud enough for me to hear. Look at those teeth. It's a miracle they haven't mauled someone yet. Some neighbors bought into it. I saw the way they'd pull their children a little closer, the way they'd cross the street to avoid us. They were sheep, and Brenda was the shepherd with the sharpest crook. Others, a quiet few, would give me a sympathetic nod. They knew Brenda. They knew her reign of petty terror. But they were too afraid to speak up. Fear, I've learned, is the mortar that holds together communities like this. I tried to ignore it. I had lost my wife. A battle with a power-mad HOA president seemed trivial, a buzzing fly in a house already consumed by grief. I focused on my work, the scent of sawdust and the hum of the lathe my only solace. I built a beautiful rocking chair from walnut, imagining Sarah sitting in it on the porch. I built a bookshelf for all the books she'd never get to read. Each project was a monument to her memory. But Brenda was relentless. Her campaign was a slow, grinding pressure test, and she was looking for the breaking point. She found it on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my workshop in the garage, the door open to the warm spring air. Judge and jury were dozing in a patch of sun on the driveway. A car, a bland white sedan from the county, pulled up to the curb. An officer from animal control got out. My blood went cold. He was a young man, looked barely out of his 20s, and he had the uncomfortable expression of someone who knew he was about to ruin a person's day. "Sir, are these your dogs?" he asked, gesturing to the two sleeping shepherds. "Yes, they are," I said, my voice tight. "Is there a problem, officer?" "We received a call," he said, consulting his clipboard. "A report of two aggressive German shepherds roaming the neighborhood, acting menacingly." The caller stated one of them snapped at her child. The lie was so audacious, so utterly baseless, that for a moment I couldn't even speak. Judge hadn't moved from that spot in over an hour. Jury was so deeply asleep he was twitching. "That's impossible," I finally managed. "They've been right here with me all day. They haven't been out of my sight." Across the street, I saw a curtain twitch in Brenda's window. The puppet master, watching her show. The officer looked from the dogs to me, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. The caller was very specific. "Sir. Brenda Miller. Said she had to pull her son away before the dog bit him." Brenda didn't have a son. She had a pampered, overfed poodle named Prince Fluffy, who she pushed around in a stroller. "Brenda Miller's son is a poodle," I said, the words coming out flat and dead. "And my dogs have not left my property." This was it. This was the turning point. This wasn't about fines or bylaws anymore. She had crossed a line, a bright red one. She had threatened my family, the last two living pieces of my wife I had left. In her petty quest for control, she had fabricated a lie that could get my dogs labeled as dangerous, taken from me, and potentially euthanized. The engineer in my head, the calm, methodical part that had been dormant, suddenly woke up. The problem was no longer a simple nuisance complaint. The problem was a systemic failure. The structure was unsound. And Brenda was the faulty beam at the center of it all, threatening to bring the whole thing down. I looked at the young officer. "Officer," I said, my voice changing, losing its pleading edge and gaining a new, hard resolve. "I can provide you with time-stamped security footage from the camera." I pointed to the small dome under the eaves of my garage, proving my dogs have not moved from this spot in the last 3 hours. "I can also provide you with their service records from the police department, including commendations for their work in narcotics and search and rescue." I walked into the house, my movements precise. I came back with a file folder. Inside were the commendations, the vet records, the K-9 retirement papers signed by the chief of police. I handed them to the officer. He flipped through the documents, his eyes widening. He saw Sarah's name listed as the handler. He looked at the pictures of Judge with a pile of confiscated drugs, of jury finding a lost child in the woods. He looked at the commendation letter from the mayor. He looked up from the folder, then over at the two sleeping dogs, then back at me. A new respect dawned on his face. "These are a couple of heroes, sir," he said, his tone completely changed. "They are," I said. And they are being harassed by a woman who is filing a false report. Which, I believe, is a crime. The officer nodded slowly, handing the folder back. It is, sir. A misdemeanor. He looked over at Brenda's house, his expression hardening. I'm going to have a word with Mr. Miller. Thank you for your cooperation. I'm sorry for the disturbance. He closed his notebook, got back in his car, and drove away. The immediate threat was gone. But I knew, with the certainty of a load-bearing calculation, that this was far from over. Brenda had tried to use the system against me. Now, I was going to use the system against her. The peace-seeking man who just wanted to be left alone to grieve and build his furniture was gone. In his place stood a structural engineer who had just identified a fatal flaw in the design. And I was going to dismantle it. Methodically. Completely. And with extreme prejudice. That night, I didn't go to the workshop. I went to my office. I pulled out a fresh legal pad and a set of drafting pencils. At the top of the page, I wrote, Project Takedown. My first step was a deep dive into the foundation of Brenda's power, the HOA's governing documents. I spent the next 3 nights reading every word of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the bylaws, and the last 5 years of meeting minutes. It was as dry as old sawdust, but I treated it like a blueprint. I was looking for inconsistencies, loopholes, and procedural violations. I highlighted every ambiguous phrase, every poorly defined rule. And I found them. Lots of them. The rule about intimidating breeds was nowhere to be found. The fine schedule she was using had never been formally voted on or approved by the board, as required by the bylaws. She was, in essence, making it all up as she went along. She had built her kingdom on a foundation of sand. Next, I needed to understand the financial structure. As a homeowner, I had the right to review the HOA's financial records. I sent a formal, certified letter requesting a complete accounting for the past 2 fiscal years, including all vendor contracts and receipts. It was a move that was sure to rattle her cage. While I waited for that, I upgraded my home's defenses. The single camera on the garage wasn't enough. I was designing a system now. I bought 4 high-resolution, night vision cameras with motion-activated recording and audio capabilities. I installed them discreetly, covering every angle of my property, the front yard, the driveway, the back fence, and one pointed directly at my workshop door. They weren't just for security, they were for data collection. I needed an ally. This wasn't a project I could complete alone. I thought of George. George lived 3 houses down. He was a retired police detective, a contemporary of Sarah's, though they worked in different departments. He was a quiet man who spent most of his time tending his immaculate garden. More importantly, I had seen the way he looked at Brenda during the rare HOA meetings I'd attended. It was a look of profound, professional loathing. I found him pruning his hydrangeas. I laid out the whole story, from the first notice to the animal control visit. He listened without interrupting, his weathered face impassive. When I finished, he snipped a dead blossom from a stem with a satisfying click. Brenda, he said, his voice a low grumble. She's a piece of work. Thinks running this little cul-de-sac makes her the Queen of England. He looked me in the eye. Filing a false report is a serious thing, Frank. Especially when it involves retired K-9s. That's an insult to the badge. I know, I said. And that's why I'm done being polite. I'm going after her. Legally. Methodically. I've requested the financials. I'm reviewing the bylaws. But I'm an engineer. I know structures, not statutes. I could use a detective's eye. A slow smile spread across George's face. Son, I spent 30 years putting bullies like her in their place. It's a hobby I'm not ready to give up just yet. Count me in. What's the plan? The plan, I said, feeling a surge of confidence, is to give her enough rope to hang herself. We just need to make sure the rope is strong, the knot is tied correctly, and the drop is long enough. George chuckled. I like the way you think, Frank. First thing you need to do is bait the trap. The bait was the next phase of my plan. I needed to provoke Brenda into making a mistake, a big one, on my turf and on my cameras. She was driven by a need for control and an obsession with appearances. So, I decided to create a project that would be an affront to both. I went to a specialty lumber yard and bought a massive, 10-foot-long slab of raw, live-edge maple. It was a beautiful piece of wood, but it was also heavy, unwieldy, and looked like a giant, untamed log. I had it delivered and left right in the middle of my driveway. Then, I started working on it. Outside. I set up my sawhorses, brought out my loudest tools, the belt sander, the router, the circular saw, and I went to work. I made sure to do it during the hours expressly permitted by city ordinance and HOA rules, between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. on weekdays. I was noisy, I was messy, and I was perfectly, infuriatingly within my rights. The effect was immediate. Brenda was on my lawn within the hour. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, gesturing at the beautiful chaos of my open-air workshop. Sawdust coated a fine layer of my driveway. "It's a table," I said calmly, not turning off the sander. "For a client. This is a residential area, not a lumber mill. You are creating a disturbance. And that thing," she pointed a trembling finger at the maple slab, "is an eyesore." I finally shut off the sander, the sudden silence making her voice sound even more shrill. I pulled out a small, laminated card from my pocket. On it was the text of HOA Bylaw 24, Section A, regarding home-based businesses and hobbies, and City Ordinance 1138, regarding residential noise levels. "According to this," I said, holding it up for her to read, "I am operating within the approved hours and my decibel level is well below the legal limit. As for the eyesore, that is raw material for a project, temporarily stored on my private property. There's no rule against that," I had checked meticulously. Her face went from red to a deep, alarming shade of purple. It was like watching a mood ring on a very angry person. "I will have you shut down. I will fine you into oblivion." "You go right ahead, Brenda," I said, a small, cold smile on my face. "Just make sure you document everything. I know I will be." I turned the sander back on. She stood there for another minute, fuming, before storming off. The trap was baited. The cameras were rolling. Now, all I had to do was wait for the rat to venture out of its hole. A few days later, the financial documents I had requested arrived. They came in a large manila envelope, dropped unceremoniously on my doorstep. Brenda had complied, but I could feel the resentment in the very weight of the paper. That night, George came over. We spread the documents across my dining room table, the same table I had built with Sarah years ago. It took us less than an hour to find it. The red flag wasn't just a flag, it was a giant, flapping billboard. The HOA's biggest expense, by a huge margin, was landscaping. The contract was with a company called Brenda's Blooms. The address listed for the company was a P.O. box in the next town over. The invoices were astronomical, charging for services that were clearly not being rendered. Quarterly aeration and reseeding for a neighborhood that was mostly xeriscaped. Exotic flower planting for community pots that held the same sad-looking petunias year-round. Classic self-dealing, George grunted, tapping a thick finger on an invoice for $5,000 for tree pruning. She's using the HOA as her personal piggy bank. A quick search of state business records confirmed our suspicions. Brenda's Blooms was a sole proprietorship. The owner was listed as Brenda Miller. She hadn't even bothered to hide it very well, probably assuming no one would ever bother to look. Arrogance is a powerful blindfold. "This is embezzlement," I said, the word tasting like rust in my mouth. "It's a felony." "It is," George confirmed. "But we need more. We need direct proof that the money is going to her, not just her company. We need bank statements. And that's something we can't get legally. Not yet." He was right. We had the smoke, but we needed to see the fire. We needed Brenda to make another, bigger mistake. The pressure I was putting on her with my woodworking project was clearly working. The violation notices started appearing daily, taped to my front door. Improper disposal of industrial waste, for a bag of sawdust next to my trash can. Unsafe work environment, for having an extension cord running across my own driveway. They were acts of pure desperation, and I documented each one, filing them away in my project takedown binder. The community was starting to notice, too. My very public, very loud, and very legal project was forcing the issue. People who had been afraid to speak were now watching the battle unfold. I saw neighbors whispering to each other as Brenda marched up my driveway to deliver her daily decree. I was becoming a symbol of resistance, whether I wanted to be or not. The breaking point came on a Thursday night. It was late, just after midnight. I was in my office, reviewing my camera footage from the day, when a motion alert popped up on my screen. It was the camera pointed at my workshop. I watched, my heart thumping a slow, steady rhythm. A figure, cloaked in a dark hoodie, crept up my driveway. They moved with a clumsy stealth that was almost comical. The figure was carrying a can of something. As they got closer to the massive maple slab resting on the sawhorses, they raised the can. It was a can of paint stripper. The figure was Brenda. She unscrewed the cap and began to pour the viscous, chemical-smelling liquid all over the beautiful, hand-sanded surface of the wood. It was an act of pure, spiteful vandalism. She was trying to destroy my work, to ruin the one thing that was bringing me a sliver of peace. She didn't stop there. She moved toward my workshop, trying the handle. It was locked. Frustrated, she took out a key, not a lockpick, a key, and tried to scratch the paint on the side door. It was a petty, childish act of rage. I watched it all, my face a cold, emotionless mask. The camera captured everything in crystal-clear high definition, including her face when the hood slipped back for a moment. The audio picked up her muttered curses. She had done it. She had walked right into the center of the trap and tripped the wire. I had her on trespassing, vandalism, and attempted destruction of property. I saved the video file to 3 separate hard drives and a cloud server. This was the pillar that would support the entire case against her. The next monthly HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. It was usually a dull affair, held in the sterile community clubhouse, attended by a handful of retirees and Brenda's few loyal cronies. This time, I had a feeling it would be different. I let the ruined slab of maple sit in my driveway for everyone to see. The chemical had eaten away the finish, leaving ugly, scarred patches on the wood. It was a testament to her venom. Neighbors walked by and stared, their expressions a mixture of shock and disgust. The whispers grew louder. On the day of the meeting, I prepared my presentation. I didn't need notes. I had the facts, and the facts were a fortress. I loaded the video file onto a small USB drive. George had called ahead to the community center management and confirmed they had a projector and a screen. He told me he'd be there, just to watch the show. I arrived at the clubhouse to a surprisingly full room. Word had spread. The battle on our quiet street had become a spectator sport. People were curious. They were tired of Brenda's tyranny, and they smelled blood in the water. Brenda sat at the head of the table, flanked by the 2 other board members, a nervous-looking accountant named Stan and a woman who seemed to have nodding as her only function. Brenda banged her gavel, a little too hard. "The meeting will come to order," she announced, her voice tight. She shot me a look of pure hatred from across the room. She thought this was her arena. She thought she was in control. She went through the old business quickly, her voice dripping with impatience. Then she got to the main event. New business. It has come to the board's attention that the resident at 112 Oak Street, Frank Peterson, has been engaging in activities that violate numerous community standards. She launched into a prepared speech, a tirade filled with lies and exaggerations. She painted me as a rogue element, a menace to the peace and tranquility of the neighborhood. She spoke of industrial noise, hazardous materials, and a complete disregard for his neighbors. She was digging her own grave with every word. Therefore, she concluded, her voice rising to a crescendo, I am proposing an immediate and severe fine of $5,000 and a cease and desist order on his factory operations. A murmur went through the crowd. The fine was absurd, unprecedented. Brenda looked at me, a triumphant smirk on her face. "Do you have anything to say for yourself, Frank?" I stood up slowly. All eyes were on me. I felt strangely calm. "I do, actually," I said, my voice even and clear. "Brenda, you've made some serious accusations. Accusations of creating a nuisance, of being a bad neighbor. But I think you've left out a few key details." I walked to the front of the room, holding the small USB drive. I believe in data. In evidence. So, I'd like to present some. I plugged the drive into the laptop connected to the projector. Brenda's eyes narrowed. What is this? This is not on the agenda. Consider it a clarification, I said. I clicked on the file. The video filled the large screen on the wall. The room went silent. They saw my driveway, illuminated by the ghostly green of the night vision camera. They saw the hooded figure. They saw Brenda's face as she poured the paint stripper. They heard her muttered curses. They saw her trying to deface my property. A collective gasp went through the room. People turned to stare at Brenda, their faces a mix of horror and disbelief. Brenda's face had gone completely white. She looked like a statue carved from chalk. This is a fake, she sputtered. It's doctored. He's trying to frame me. It's a time-stamped, high-definition digital recording, Brenda, I said, my voice cutting through her panicked denials. Forensically sound. It shows you, on my private property, without my permission, willfully destroying several $1,000s worth of material and attempting to damage my home. That's trespassing and felony vandalism. She flew into a rage. It was spectacular. You were harassing me. With your noise and your filth. You drove me to it. You and your monstrous dogs. So you're admitting it's you in the video? I asked, my voice deceptively gentle. Checkmate. The room erupted in whispers. Her own words had condemned her. Stan, the accountant, was slowly sliding his chair away from her as if she were radioactive. The nodding woman looked like she was about to faint. Brenda stood up, knocking her chair over. She pointed a shaking finger at me. You will not get away with this. I am the president of this association. I will sue you for everything you have. I will have you thrown out of this community. Her credibility had shattered like cheap glass. No one was looking at her with fear anymore. They were looking at her with contempt. She had lost the crowd. She had lost her power. But she didn't know it yet. She still thought her title meant something. I simply stood there and let her rant. Every word she spoke, every wild accusation she hurled, only served to tighten the noose she had placed around her own neck. The first reveal was complete. The structure of her authority was critically damaged. And I was just getting started on the demolition. The fallout from the meeting was immediate and glorious. Brenda was exposed. Her hysterical, self-incriminating meltdown in front of 24 witnesses had done more damage to her reputation than my video ever could have. The story spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. She was no longer the feared queen, she was the crazy lady who snuck around at night destroying property. But I knew a cornered animal is the most dangerous. Humiliation wouldn't make her back down, it would make her more vicious. I was right. The official HOA notices stopped, but a new, far more sinister campaign began. It started online. A new account popped up on the community's social media page, a concerned neighbor, using a fake name. The posts were vile. They painted me as a disturbed and dangerous recluse. They mentioned that I was a widower, twisting my grief into something creepy and unstable. Who knows what a man like that, all alone with those vicious dogs, is capable of, one post read. Then, it escalated. The anonymous profile started making accusations about my work. They claimed my woodworking business was a front for something illegal. They suggested I was using dangerous chemicals that were poisoning the neighborhood's soil. It was a classic smear campaign, designed to isolate me and turn public opinion into a weapon. The city's code enforcement office paid me a visit, acting on an anonymous tip about unpermitted commercial activity and improper hazardous waste disposal. I calmly showed them my business license, my permits, and the safety data sheets for all my wood stains and finishes, which were all non-toxic and environmentally friendly. The inspectors were apologetic, admitting they were obligated to follow up on every complaint, no matter how baseless it seemed. George, my detective ally, tracked the IP address of the fake social media account. It wasn't hard. It traced back to Brenda's home Wi-Fi network. It was libel, and it was provable. We added it to the growing pile of evidence in my Project Takedown binder. She's getting sloppy, George observed, looking over the printouts of the posts. This is pure emotion. She's not thinking strategically anymore. She's just lashing out. That's what I'm counting on, I said. I want her to feel cornered. I want her to make one more big mistake. The final piece of the puzzle came from the most unexpected source. One evening, my doorbell rang. Standing on my porch was a man I barely recognized, though I had seen him a few times in passing. He was pale, sweating, and clutching a thick envelope. It was Brenda's husband, Robert. He looked like a man who had been living in a hostage situation for 20 years. "Mr. Peterson," he stammered, refusing to make eye contact. "My wife, she's out of control. She's going to ruin us both." I just waited, letting him talk. "This has gone too far," he continued, his voice barely a whisper. "The things she's saying about you, the things she's doing with the HOA's money. I can't be a part of it anymore. I'm not going to prison for her." He thrust the envelope into my hands. "These are copies," he said. "The originals are with my lawyer. It's everything. The real invoices from the landscaping company she hired for a fraction of the cost. The bank statements from Brenda's Blooms showing the deposits from the HOA account. And the statements from her personal credit card, showing how she used that money. A cruise. A new car. Designer handbags." He finally looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "Just, be careful. She's unhinged. When she finds out I've done this, she'll be. I don't know what she'll do." "Thank you, Robert," I said, my voice heavy with a strange mix of pity and triumph. "You've done the right thing." He nodded and practically ran from my porch, a man escaping his own life. I opened the envelope. It was the key. The final, undeniable proof. It wasn't just incompetence or abuse of power anymore. This was a detailed, documented map of felony wire fraud and embezzlement, stretching back years. She hadn't just stolen from the community, she had built her entire lifestyle on it. The next morning, George and I sat in the waiting room of the district attorney's office. The Project Takedown binder was now 3 inches thick. It contained the HOA bylaws, every fraudulent fine, photos of the vandalism, printouts of the libelous social media posts, a sworn affidavit from me, and now, the crown jewel, the financial documents provided by Robert. We met with an assistant district attorney, a sharp woman in her 40s. I laid out the story from the beginning, methodically, like I was explaining a structural analysis. I presented the evidence in chronological order. I showed her the patterns of escalation, from petty harassment to felony crimes. She listened intently, her expression growing more and more serious as I continued. When I finished, she picked up the bank statements from Robert. She traced the flow of money with her finger, from the HOA account to Brenda's Blooms to a Nordstrom's charge. "This is one of the most well-documented cases of HOA fraud I've ever seen, Mr. Peterson," she said, a grim admiration in her voice. "You've done most of our work for us." She looked at George. "Detective, I assume your fingerprints aren't all over this." "Clean as a whistle," George said with a grin. "I was just a concerned neighbor offering moral support." "Good," the ADA said. "We'll take it from here. We'll need to secure a warrant, but with this evidence, it won't be a problem. Don't engage with her. Don't speak to her. Let the system handle it now." We left the DA's office and walked out into the bright sunlight. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a tension I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The plan was in motion. The demolition was scheduled. Brenda, oblivious, was about to make her final, fatal error. 2 days later, a notice was posted on every door in the neighborhood. It was a call for a special emergency HOA meeting. The purpose, printed in bold, angry letters, was to vote on the forced removal of the resident at 112 Oak Street for conduct detrimental to the community. She was trying to use the nuclear option. She was trying to have me legally evicted from my own home based on the lies she had manufactured. It was a desperate, last-ditch power play. And it was going to be the stage for her spectacular downfall. George called me when he saw the notice. "She just set the time and place for her own execution," he said, a note of dark glee in his voice. "The DA's office is ready to move. They were just waiting for the right moment. This is it." The trap was set. The authorities were in place. All I had to do was walk in and watch the show. The night of the special meeting, the community clubhouse was packed. It felt less like an HOA meeting and more like a public trial. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. Everyone was there. Even Robert, Brenda's husband, was huddled in a back corner, looking small and terrified. Brenda was at the head table again, but this time she looked different. There was a frantic, brittle energy about her. Her smile was too wide, her movements too sharp. She was a woman running on pure spite. I took a seat in the front row. George sat beside me, a calming, solid presence. He gave me a subtle nod. The plan was in motion. Brenda banged the gavel, the sound cracking through the silence. This special meeting is called to order. We are here tonight to address a cancer in our community. A man who has flouted our rules, harassed our board, and created a dangerous and hostile environment for our families. She was magnificent in her delusion. She launched into her pre-rehearsed speech, a greatest hits of her fabricated accusations. She held up photos she'd taken of my sawdust bags as proof of hazardous waste. She read her own anonymous, libelous social media posts aloud, presenting them as the voice of the concerned community. I let her talk. I let her spin her web of lies, each word another thread in her own cocoon. The crowd was restless. They had seen the video. They knew she was a liar and a vandal. Her words had no power here anymore. And so, she concluded, her voice trembling with manufactured rage, I call for a vote. All in favor of petitioning the court for the immediate removal of Frank Peterson from our community, say aye. Before anyone could speak, the double doors at the back of the clubhouse swung open. Two people walked in. A man and a woman, dressed in plain business attire. They moved with a quiet authority that instantly commanded the room's attention. They were detectives from the Financial Crimes Unit. They walked to the front of the room and stood near the podium. The lead detective, a calm, serious-looking man, looked at Brenda. "Brenda Miller," he asked, his voice polite but firm. Brenda stared at them, her mouth hanging open. Who are you?" "This is a private meeting." "We have a warrant for your arrest," the detective said simply. The room erupted. Not in shouts, but in a collective, shocked intake of breath. It was a sound I'll never forget. "Arrest!" Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking. "For what? This is him. This is his doing. He's the criminal." She pointed a trembling finger at me. The ADA from the district attorney's office stepped forward from just behind the detectives. She had been waiting in the wings. "Brenda Miller," she said, her voice cutting through the noise, "you are under arrest for multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement of funds, and felony vandalism." She then turned to the assembled homeowners. "For the past 3 years," she announced, her voice ringing with authority, "Mr. Miller, as president of your HOA, has systematically embezzled over $90,000 of your community funds. She used a shell company, Brenda's Blooms, to submit fraudulent invoices for services that were never rendered, and funneled your money directly into her personal bank accounts to pay for cars, vacations, and luxury goods." She wasn't finished. "Furthermore, she is being charged with felony vandalism for the willful destruction of private property belonging to Mr. Frank Peterson, an act that was captured on video. It was a systematic, public unmasking. Every lie, every crime, laid bare for the entire community to see. I didn't have to say a word. The truth, backed by the full weight of the law, was doing all the work. Brenda completely unraveled. It was a full-scale public meltdown. "No. It's lies. All lies," she screamed, her eyes wild. She looked at her husband. "Robert. Tell them. Tell them it's not true. You knew. You were a part of it." In her panic, she had just confessed and implicated her husband as an accomplice. Robert sank lower in his chair, his face buried in his hands. She turned her fury back on me. You did this. You creep. Hiding in your garage with your dead wife's dogs. You ruined everything." The female detective stepped forward. "Ma'am, you need to come with us now," she reached for Brenda's arm. Brenda recoiled, swatting at the detective's hand. "Don't you touch me." That was the last straw. The male detective moved in swiftly, taking her by the arm and spinning her around, cuffing her hands behind her back with a series of efficient, metallic clicks. The sound was deafening in the stunned silence of the room. She was being arrested. In front of everyone. At the very meeting she had called to destroy me. The poetic justice of it was so thick you could taste it. As they led her away, a crying, screaming, pathetic mess, she locked eyes with me one last time. Her face was a twisted mask of pure, undiluted hatred. "You'll regret this, Frank," she shrieked, her voice echoing in the clubhouse. "I'll destroy you. I swear it." It was her final, impotent threat. A hollow echo from a queen who had just been dethroned, publicly and permanently. The doors closed behind her, and the room was left in a state of profound, absolute shock. The reign of terror was over. In the stunned silence that followed Brenda's dramatic exit, the community seemed to collectively exhale. It was the sound of a long-held tension finally releasing. The ADA stepped forward again to address the shell-shocked residents. "The district attorney's office will be in touch with the remaining board members to oversee a transition and ensure the integrity of the HOA's finances moving forward," she said calmly. "We recommend you seek legal counsel to begin civil proceedings to recover the stolen funds from Mr. Miller's assets." With that, she and the remaining detective departed, leaving the neighborhood to grapple with the wreckage. The aftermath was swift. Stan, the nervous accountant, and the nodding woman immediately resigned from the board. An emergency election was held the following week. A retired schoolteacher named Eleanor, a woman known for her kindness and common sense, was elected the new president. One of her first acts was to call a special session to formally apologize to me on behalf of the community. Her second act was to go through the bylaws with a fine-toothed comb, striking every vague, arbitrary, and tyrannical rule Brenda had instituted. The community was being rebuilt on a foundation of reason and respect, not fear and control. The legal process ground on, as it does. Brenda, facing overwhelming evidence, took a plea bargain. She was convicted on multiple felony counts. She was sentenced to 4 years in state prison and ordered to pay full restitution. Her assets were seized, including the house with the perfectly manicured lawn. Robert, who had cooperated fully with the prosecution, received probation. He filed for divorce before her sentencing was even announced, sold what was left, and moved out of state, disappearing into a quiet life of his own. Brenda lost everything: her money, her power, her family, and her freedom. She had built her house of cards on a foundation of arrogance, and the slightest breeze of accountability had brought it all crashing down. For me, life slowly returned to a new kind of normal. The neighbors who had once shunned me now went out of their way to be friendly. They'd stop to chat when I was walking judge and jury, often bringing treats for the hero dogs. The dogs, oblivious to their role in the neighborhood drama, accepted the offerings with dignified grace. My woodworking business flourished. The story, in a strange way, had become a local legend, and people were intrigued. They'd come to me not just for a piece of furniture, but to meet the quiet engineer who had taken down the HOA tyrant. The ruined slab of maple, which I had thought was lost, became my most requested project. I carefully cut away the damaged sections and used the remaining beautiful wood to build a victory bench, which I donated to the community park. It became a symbol of the neighborhood's liberation. George and I became firm friends. We'd often sit on my porch in the evenings, watching the sunset, a comfortable silence between us. We had fought a war together, a strange, suburban war, and had won. One evening, as judge and jury dozed at my feet, George turned to me. "You know," he said, "you never set out to be a hero, Frank. You just wanted to be left alone." I thought about that for a moment, watching the last rays of sun paint the sky. "I did," I admitted. But she wouldn't let me. She pushed, and she backed me into a corner. She threatened the last pieces of Sarah I have left. I looked down at the 2 sleeping shepherds, their chests rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. "I learned something from all this," I continued. "Something my engineering career taught me, but I'd forgotten. You can't ignore a structural flaw. Whether it's in a bridge or in a community, if you let a weak point fester, it will eventually cause a catastrophic failure. Brenda was a flaw in the system. I didn't destroy her, I just exposed the weakness until the whole rotten structure collapsed under its own weight. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about restoration. It was about taking a system that was broken and making it sound again. It was about restoring the peace that Brenda had shattered, not just for me, but for everyone. My life was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the empty silence of grief anymore. It was the full, contented silence of peace. The hum of my lathe, the scent of fresh-cut cedar, the gentle snores of my 2 loyal companions, these were the sounds of my world, a world I had fought to protect. I had finally achieved the peace I had sought when I moved here. My home was a sanctuary again. The community was healing, growing stronger and more connected than it had ever been under Brenda's divisive rule. And as I sat there on my porch, a man at peace in his own home, I knew that Sarah would have been proud. Very proud. The dogs she had trained to protect and serve had, in their own way, done just that one last time. They had helped protect our home, our legacy, and our peace. And that was a job well done.